So when we talk about, resilient systems, I think by default, what comes to mind would be, or how easy is it for your system to recover from, maybe technical glitches and co. But there are varying factors, when we talk about, resilience. And we could talk about things around maybe security, which is how safe your system is. Because, like we know today, there are lots of, or the cybercrime rates, is really very high. And this is, a general thing, worldwide. You could talk about, regulatory policies. Today the CBN can come around and say, oh, um, change how you do this, or let's change the dynamics of this certain policy that may have to do with user data or thereabouts. You could have things around high availability, ensuring that your system is always up, right? Or like I said earlier on, how you're able to recover from technical glitches. No system is perfect today, right? So whenever you encounter these things, how fast are you able to recover from it, right? So there's also the customer experience, around this. As infrastructure, there's, how scalable your system is. If you're building a solution for, um, let's say a certain amount of people, what's the plan for, when there's a surge in, request? What happens when you intend to, grow, 10x, 20x, what happens? So would your system be able to withstand, this level of load, right? So these are some of the things that we talk about when it comes to system resilience. So basically, in a nutshell, it's basically just ensuring that, the different component that basically forms the service that you render to your users, ensuring that they are actually intact, regardless of, whatever comes. But yeah, I think that's what I'll just define it as. I've had, um, a number of them, but I think one of my most interesting um, would be sometime, 2020. And this is, the point where we needed to build, of course, this is where I work at the moment. We had to build, a system which will define as our core, right? Basically like the core infrastructure to which, everything is going to, rely on, right? And at the time, the customer base, is not as we have it today. But when we had to, come to a round table to discuss what we needed to do, there were, certain items that we had to like, cater to. Which, one of them is what I said earlier, which is how how do you cater to for tomorrow, right? You currently at let's say X number of customer base at the moment, right? You are going to you want to expand, you want to really push out marketing and all that, right? And once these things happen, you know what happens then? You have a surge in users, a lot of requests hitting your system and all that. You don't want to um you don't want to get distracted when you're trying to reach out to your customers, right? You don't want to be at the back end trying to fix things while guys a lot of users are basically coming on board. So that was the point where we were like, oh, let's plan for the next 10 years from now. Let's do a 10 years, projection. Whatever we're doing now, let's work towards ensuring that it will still be relevant for us, in the next 10 years, even if we do a 20x number, right? And this is me talking about, user availability, service availability. This is me talking about basically fault tolerance. Because at some point you're like, oh, we have, X number of, customers at the moment. Let's stress test the system. Let's try 20,000 transactions in a second. Let's see how it works. And in the process of doing this, we figured out that there were a lot of optimization we had to do, and we kept on stressing and stressing until the point where we were able to do a transaction as fast as 5 milliseconds or less. And at that point we're like, oh cool, and we could testify, while the company or the user base continued to grow, that even while we had more users, the system was still very performant, right? And this is just about throughput, right? There is a bit around ensuring that you're able to manage the system efficiently, right? Ensuring that you're able to, expand, a certain service or, shrink it at some point based on user request. And this is where we had to, think about, a model of, um, you know, deploying your service. This is where containerization came into play. Or let us modularize this thing. Let us, make every service stand on its own. And this is where we talk about microservice, right? Ensuring that, that service that would have been, just one very gigantic system, ensuring that you're able to pieces them into, core functional, service. For instance, you want to be able to log in, you should have a service that does that. And with this model, you figure out that there are some services that you don't even remember exist, right? Because you hardly have to touch them, right? But then they form this whole. Now there is the bit around security, and good enough, in today's ecosystem, I suppose, every company, basically have to invest a lot in security. And this was something that we had to like put into consideration, right? How safe is the system, right? How safe is the data within the database, right? What happens when you have, a lot of requests, hitting your system at the same time, trying to process one data, right? How are you able to ensure that, you don't have dirty data? One service tries to do this and another service, comes in, and, you're talking about data concurrency or threat safety here, right? So these are the things, we put into the picture. Then, we're talking about the regulatory bits. There is, of course, we know account tiering, right? There are certain limitations to what an account can do based on the tier level, right? So these things are things that were also factored in. And, a lot of these things, put together, um, load balancing, ability to read through data, efficiently, even down to customer experience. The mobile app that the user, interfaces with, how intuitive is it, right? Because resilience, like I said, is not just about how you're able to recover from things. It's also about how well your service is for your user, for the intended user, right? When there is an issue around the service, right? What is the behavior of the user, right? At that point in time. So these are things that we have to consider when building a system. And of course, this is an iterative process, right? Because you can't get perfection at some initial stage. So we have to cater to a lot of all these things, right? And of course, there are a lot of really experienced, personnel, and putting all these things together, I think it was a very interesting one. And yeah, the system, of course, still today still stand the test of time. So I think I would start with saying there's been a lot of progress, right, with respect to fintech in Africa, all right? Looking at the past 10, 15 years, right? We've seen a lot of interesting things coming out. We've seen, a number of, startups, making waves. You've seen like, so there's knowledge depth, right? Which, we've had, along the line. And yeah, we have, lots of companies that are actually doing well. So, but then, irrespective of this, you still have this understanding that when it comes to digital adoption, Africa is not exactly where it should be, right? Even while, things are, we are getting there, we're doing great stuff. But if you compare, what we're doing now to, what, we have, in, the European market and stuff, while, we're doing really interesting things, you would see that there's still room for growth. And when you look at the challenges that, or the things that have actually, I won't use the word constraint, but the frictions basically around the system. You would see things around, knowledge base. You could see things around maybe access to capital. You could see things around um, internet, right? Internet coverage, cost of internet. You could, yeah, the literacy is also, a very big factor here. So that's financial, literacy is not as high as, we'd expect it to be. So there are a lot of things. So if, building for this, an environment like this, good enough, we have, today we have, when it comes to infrastructure, I know there's some point in time where everything was, pretty local, right? You have, a lot of local data centers and all that. But now we have, very reliable, cloud-based infrastructure providers. And this basically, has helped a lot. And irrespective of this, we have other factors that, we intend to, cater to ensure that while you're serving, those that are, digitally sound, you also need to ensure that, those who aren't are also able to, utilize this service. And this is where we talk about, maybe the agency banking, right? This is where we talk about, having things like the USSD, right? To ensure that even with, no internet, basically you should be able to, carry out, banking service. Um, um, you should also would also consider things around, low bandwidth, service. So for instance, you're building an API, right? And you're building an API for, someone to be able to consume, which a mobile app, for instance, to be able to, access. You need to also consider the bandwidth, right? How light is the data that you're transmitting? Because if someone is buying, let's say 100 megabytes, of data, right? Even though, you may be privileged to, be able to, cater to as much data as you want, but there are people who maybe would literally live 100 megabytes in a day, right? How do you consider these people, right? Because if you understand how, if you compute the amount of data that passes through, right? It actually accumulates to something, right? Even if you think it is not really significant. So when you're building, for systems like this, you need to cater to these bandwidths, because it is not just about how much the user has, it's also about, how fast the internet is, right? So a lower bandwidth request is going to be faster than one which is higher. And you could, of course, you could try it, when you're trying to like download maybe a media file or something. So some of these things actually count. Some people want to, look at offline usage. But there are different factors, there are different, scenarios where you want to consider offline, because there is a security bit of it, right? If you're talking about offline, data, or offline, computing and whatnot, you need to ensure that whatever you have offline, right, you're basically able to sync it to the server, so that you don't have a case where someone has used up, some certain amount, and then they still are able to, like they're able to, like they basically use more than what they have, because the system is not yet synced. So this, one needs to be very careful when you're building your offline systems, but of course there are considerations like that. So there's also the bit around, redundancy, right? Or failovers, right? So when things go wrong, because today users are really very impatient, right? Like, so when things go wrong, right, how are you able to recover? So these are the things that I would want to cater to when building for, this kind of environment. Because if someone has to use my service, right, and in the midst of doing that, or while doing that, there is a disruption, right, it means that I have broken that trust at some point. And I may be lucky if the customer comes back to it, right, to utilize my service. There are some services there are some, apps that I would use today. If it doesn't serve me right, I likely would not go back there, right? For months, maybe until I don't have an option, right? So you want to serve these people, right? You also need to ensure that you can, give them that trust, right? You want them to trust you, right? And them having to trust you is you ensuring that you can serve them right. All right. So when things go wrong, how are you able to fail over, right? You don't want these guys to, have to wait for, an ending, just because something has gone wrong. So although there are costs associated to building resilient systems, because you need to cater to a lot of things. Having a failover system is not cheap, right? What that means is you need to be able to replicate your data. You need to be able to replicate your services, right? It could be basically you replicating an entire cluster, so that when one goes down, right, you can switch to the other. I know the likes of maybe AWS or Azure, or even some of our local systems, they have, what we call availability zones. And what I mean is, once something happens to this zone, you should be able to switch to the other automatically. You don't have to do that yourself, right? Of course, there are associated costs with this. So if you have to do that, you would see it there clearly. Yes, sweet stuff, but you have to pay for this extra, zone that you need to get. So these are I would have to consider all these things, when building for, this. And then there's I mentioned the financial literacy, which is also very important. I know some banks today actually they do this sensitization where you could something could pop up on your mobile device, or this is how you can do this, or do you know you can do this, or do you know you can do that, and stuff around that. So user education is also very important, right? So same as customer service, right? How are you able to communicate to your customers, right? How are you able to speak in a language they understand? In fact, even going to the literal meaning of speaking in language you understand, you have some customer, some, fintechs that would basically have, departments or customer department that speaks different kind of languages, right? You can have one that's, speaks, Igbo, Yoruba, just so, you are close to your customer. They understand you. You understand that there is a language barrier, right? You want to, even when there is really no language barrier, you want to be able to make these people understand that you understand them, you are like them, right? You understand their need, and you want to explain things to them in a language that the best understand, right? So all these things are, factors that I would want to put into the picture when, building for, systems within the African space. When we talk about, different environments, right? Of course, you use the keyword there, uniqueness to these environments, right? Some countries within Africa, have um, better adoption rates than others. Some have, better internet, speed, or, than or infrastructure than others. Same thing as, electricity, same thing as, regulatory frameworks and all that. So um, when you are having to scale across, countries within Africa, you need to consider these things. And I think regulatory part is actually very important, right? In as much as you understand what you're trying to do is really very simple, right? It is very common. It is what everyone knows. But when you go into an environment, you need to understand how their regulatory framework works. And this is where, legal come into play, right? And the compliance team, because all these things are meant to be checked before you step your foot in there. But you don't want to go there and then, someone tells you, oh, you cannot get this particular data this way, you can't get this particular data this way. That can lead you to, changing your logic, basically, right? It could even mean that you may be forced to even use a local data center, right? And when you're using a local data center, you need to be sure, right? So there's a bit around what you can do within a data center, right? If you go to the AWS or Azure, platform, you see a lot of services, a lot of things that, you can utilize to make your service, to give you, flexibility to how you can deploy or how you can utilize some certain things. There are some environment, if you're having to, use a local data center, right? Obviously, you should know that you wouldn't have as much flexibility as this. So it means that you basically will have to, design your system in a way that you're going to cater to that, this concept or this factor. I mean, for lack of a better word. So this is so this is about regulatory bits, right? Because I just needed to mention that, which is very critical. Tomorrow, someone can come and tell you, for instance, this license, you basically can't utilize this license for, or this license doesn't cover this kind of service anymore, right? Or there could even be a change in what a license, um, or how you can actually even get a license, or what you need to do to be able to, get a license. So this bit can even shut out people who would want to come in to the space to play, right? So that is actually very critical. I think I talked about the internet infrastructure, right? It's still the same way you would need to cater to the low bandwidth service, or alternative channel to your banking services, right? It was the same way I had mentioned, is going to play across this. So you need to understand the limitations across this environment, right? There's also the language barrier, right? do you want to cater to, multilingual, right? As localization. You need to understand if this particular country you are going into, right, understand English. That's the majority of their users. You need to know if they understand English, and that would actually help you know if you need to build, something that caters to, how, labels and text are rendered within your system. That could even tell how you can even deploy, your mobile app to a store, right? So these are factors. There is the user education, which I had mentioned, right? There is there's a failover, right? And this is where, again, costs come here. You need to factor in cost here. If you need to cater to a failover on a system that, I would use availability zone, for instance, on an environment that you're coerced or you're forced to use, a local data center, right? That's actually more cost because you're paying for a physical environment, right? You're paying for, physical, devices, right? You need to be able to, have like real-time monitoring to ensure that when things go down, you're able to, recover quickly. And the monitoring bit is actually very critical because you need to be able to know when things go wrong, right? And on time. Like I said earlier, things can go wrong. You can't have a very perfect system, right? So whenever something goes wrong, how are you able to recover from it, right? So all these factors actually play across, the different, environments, right? So I think there's also the security bit, right? Um, the way security will play out in just a particular environment is the way to play out across, right? You need to ensure that your system, I would use the word zero trust, right? So regardless of the environment you're actually delving into, right, you need to ensure that your data is safe, right? There's a bit around, ensuring, uh, every area within the service they're offering, both physical, both, software wise, they're also catered to. There's the process bit, right? Because somehow I would say process guides people, right? Um, you need to be sure that there are a lot of things in place to ensure that people don't go off board or off guard and do what they're not meant to do, right? Because now you're not just in a particular place. You basically have a service everywhere, right? So you don't want to have this thing around, oh, something is happening here that is not right. Something is happening here that is not right, right? So you need to be able to, ensure that, things are perfect. Things are, good enough, right? Things are, a lot of processes are actually set in place to ensure that you don't lose guard on anything, right? And then there is the partnership with, the local third parties or local stakeholders and all that. This is actually very critical because you need these people within this environment to be able to know how things are basically working around there. It's not just having a service there and then monitoring from here. You need localized personnel, right? People who understand their people, right? People who can tell you, "Oh, this is the behavior of this, people in this jurisdiction. These are the things that we need to cater to. These are the kind of services that these people want, right?" So I don't know if I covered everything, but I'm sure there are a lot of things I would not have touched. But I think these are things that I would really consider if I'm spreading, my service across, different countries within Africa. First, I would say, as a regulated entity, right, you need to be very close to the regulators, right? You, you're not, this is a very sensitive, sector where anything can go wrong, right? If you look at, things around, some fines that, that has been levied on, different countries around the world, different companies rather, you tend to see, the reasons, right? Um, you would understand that, you're not just building you're not just building something. It's not a school app, basically, right? That you're trying to build, right? This is finance, and this finance is also data, right? Anything can go wrong. This is we're talking about an environment where cybercrime is on the rise, right? And regulators are always there to ensure that you're in check, right? So whenever you're trying to, if you're building fintech solutions, right, you need to know what is and what is not, or what should and what should not, right? And data privacy is very key, right? How how you're storing customers' data, how the access customers have to their data, right? How safe the customers' data is, right? The Nigerian data protection laws are, it has a lot of things that as a fintech organization, you need to, cater to. And this will talk about KYC, KYB, you know who is PEP, So once you have all these things, built into the system from the beginning, not when you're already, of course, things are iterative, but there are a lot of things that makes up what we call the basics, right? Um, Whoever is coming into your system, you need to be able to identify that person, right? So whenever anything goes wrong, regulators should be able to identify that person. So this is not something that you can trade, right? It's not something that you want to go in later to do. So this, as long as you're building with regulators in mind, right? I think, and you also have the understanding that things can change, right? It helps you understand how to, build your system. It helps you understand how to communicate to your people, your customers. It helps you understand how to, the plans you need to make, in the future, right? It helps you also know the controls to put in place, right? So, I mean, it's also very costly when it comes to, um, basically adhering to, regulators, sorry. And that's just it. Like, you can't escape it. I think, if you're building a system, you also want to have peace of mind, right? You don't want a case where you do something and then, regulators come in and then you are, scared something terrible is going to happen, or maybe shut down and whatnot, right? Different I think recently we had a lot of things happening, from the CBN's point of view, and all that, they move around, run one or two checks, advise what you can do and all that, and they give you timelines on how you can actually address these things, or when you should address these things, right? And as as a reputable organization who understands that you're building in a regulated entity, in a regulated environment, right? These things are no-brainers. You have to adhere, right? So in as much as you have this understanding, right, it basically helps you. So even while, of course, this is a dynamic environment, even while things changes, right, you you're able to adjust quickly, right? It's not a case where, regulator says this and then you've really not catered to that at all, and then you're having to, do a lot of things that would, shut out people from, even accessing the service just because you didn't cater to some things at the early stage. So it is, as long as you have this close, you're working closely with regulators in understanding what you're doing, you have your compliance team in check, legal and compliance, which is very key in every company. I think it can't be overemphasized, right? For every serious fintech company or a bank, you need to have your legal and compliance team at the top of their games, because they are the ones who will tell you, even if you're trying to come up with a very interesting product, right? They can tell you, no, you can't push this out. Or if you want to push this out, you need to cater to X, Y, Z. And to you, you could be like, oh, this is going to shut down our, this is going to reduce our revenue, this is going to do this. But you can't, it's easier you make your pennies gradually than to be out there and then, at some point you're slammed and then you're back down. So you don't want to be at that point. So I think working closely with regulators will help you even with the dynamic changes. Worst case scenario, there are some frictions at some point, but you'll be faster than you would have been if you were not, closely working with all these principles and guidelines. I'd like to talk about things that have been happening in recent times. Not exactly the software, but yeah, of course, we still touch on that. Um, there's a thing around, you know, um, an insider threat, right? Insider threat is one of the biggest, concerns that, of vulnerabilities that you could have in companies. And this is about the the humans, right? This is about the staffs, right? And like I said, policies are things that guides, some of these, behaviors. It is very important that, policies are there, are put in place, processes are put in place to ensure that people follow, the right process, right? How are you changing configurations? Or, what are the processes at which configuration changes are being done? Um, when things happen behind the scene, someone changes something, behind the scene, right? How is it tracked, right? How frequent do you audit, these changes in the system, right? Um, this is for me is one very big part that I think people need to be very aware of, right? Because the people inside are the ones that knows it the most. It's more like saying, or your 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 biggest enemy or your biggest threat can be the people closest to you, right? So I think that's a very critical area. Then we can talk about things around maybe around the softwares now. How safe are your data in flight, right? I know one of the common mistakes that people can make, especially at the very early stage, is, not catering to, or, leaving out some things um, that should have been catered to. For instance, we know request in flights, everyone say, oh, go through HTTPS and all that, right? Which is actually very, important. But I think an extra layer is you having to encrypt your data, right? To ensure that even when it is intercepted, before it's within wires, it cannot be, read through, it cannot be you can't make sense of it, right? And I think I mentioned zero trust, right? How how do people access your service, your API, for instance, right? So even if you have, credentials to accessing a service, right? Um, can you access it from anywhere, right? These are the things that needs to be checked. You need to know where you can actually, request this service from, right? And this is where you talk about whitelisting of IPs and co. You know, you have things around, I would say, maybe SQL injection. I know recently you don't, maybe that's something that, most people would have taken care of, but SQL injections are, one of the things that, one of the vulnerabilities that we can have. And this is where we talk about sanitizing our inputs, or, using parameterized queries and all those things, you could have things around, DDoS, for instance, right? You need to, and this is where you talk about rate limiting. How I know there are systems that you receive a lot of requests at a time, like high volume systems, right? But of course, if you understand your system, right, you could know what you can rate limit it to, right? And even when you're being DDoS, right, how can you recover from it? Do you have like an alternative, endpoint that, your services can, call back, right? Do you also have, I think this is where I'll talk about, um, web application firewall, right? Where you can restrict areas in which requests can hit your service, right? So yeah, and these are like really common things that people need to be very invested in or interested in when trying to roll out stuff. Of course, key security is also very important, right? Who Even access to some certain kind of data. There are sensitive information that not everyone should have access to, right? Um, it may be intentional or not intentional, right? There's some information that someone can just have access to by mistake, right? Or via looking at something else, or via trying to go through something else, you see something else, and then that's like a trespass, right? Anything can happen. Like you could basically misuse that data you now understand, right? So it is important to set restrictions to things that should not be in the hands of some certain people, right? Only, privileged access should be given to privileged users and, nothing other than that. Now, when you talk about, even front-end systems, you begin to talk about, maybe your system access, who should have access to this service, what browser can have access to this service, and I know recently, this, you know, password, credentials and all those things are sort of easy to sniff through, right? How are you able to, secure your system, even when a password has been compromised, right? So, you have a lot of there are a lot of things really, and this is where again it has to do with having, some certain kind of system processes in place. When you have your audit team, right, they run through all these things, even the things that you don't even see, right? Even your logs, what you log, can actually set you up, right? Um, these are common mistakes that we all have made at some point in our career and all that. And then you don't log this. Because if this thing gets to this particular point, someone can see it and make use of that data. So what you log is also very important. And, these are things that the audit team, will look through because developers, product persons may not, have the time to go through those things. And that's why you have separation of concerns, right? And this is why I keep emphasizing on policies and stuff, right? So processes rather. So when you have, teams that are dedicated to ensuring that things, your system is safe, right? You would realize that you have more audits, right? You have more audit reports. Someone shares stuff with you. Oh, identified XYZ. Oh, do you have multiple session logins? Am I seeing, are you having more data in your, tokens and all those things? So I think these are the things that these are some of the vulnerabilities that we see today. And these are ways in which I know that we can actually mitigate or forestall them. People talk about, password managers and co, right? I've not really, I'm not really a fan, but if you're talking about um when that's your password manager is compromised, right? It means that basically everything is compromised. And this is even when you talk, if you I would use um maybe Google Password Manager, for instance, right? If someone is able to access your Google account, right? As they can log in with your profile, right? It means that they can change everything, right? So, with respect to this, um, I don't think password manager is like the ultimate. Of course, it can help because you basically have like some US Central, you can do that. But when you have your Google iCloud or your Google, so your Apple iCloud or your Google, password manager compromised, that means that basically everything is compromised. But yes, it's not a very common thing, right? But it's something that can happen. But yeah, it's more like a single sign-on kind of thing, you know. But it has the advantage and disadvantage. And like I said, it's not a common thing where your password manager is being compromised, but you should also have in mind that this is like a central base where if that bit goes, if it is compromised, then everything else is compromised. Migration is actually a big deal, and it also depends on the um, set of data you try to migrate, right? And I think one of the things that I would put into play is ensuring that you're able to simulate the data you're trying to migrate, right? And this is where you talk about, maybe cloning the entire data, or maybe cloning the environment, replaying that, and then seeing that, things are fine, whatever needs to be corrected, you can actually understand it from that point. If it's data schema, you basically will be able to understand. And there's a bit around having to cater to maybe backward compatibility, right? You maybe have an extra column in your data, or you took out a particular column because you don't need it anymore, right? Do you really need to take it out first, right? Or do you need to just deploy the service, and then, at some point take your time, to see or basically track, the usage of that stuff. And if nothing is there, then you can actually take it out. So this is talking about backward compatibility of data schema, right? But again, I would say having to replicate, or simulate this data, this migration is actually very critical. And I think when we talk about, you said updates, right? When we talk about updates, I think there are for mobile, right? There is a way you can actually release certain features to, a small set of people, right? And this is after doing your proper testing, because you can't push anything out without proper integration testing and maybe backlog regression testing and code. But once you're done with this, right, um depending on the nature of the change or the update, right, if it is very little updates, based on what you've done in your test environment or your staging environment, you know what is going to the live environment. But when you talk about major changes, you may need to start considering having to push out some, a subset of, these changes to users, or maybe have a different environment where you can actually push this and then route a few requests to this environment and then monitor, right? So in this way, you still have, people on the existing system, and then you have a few set of people or random, small set of people on, the system you're trying to update, right? What that will help you is you won't have you if there are issues, you would only have a small set of people, right, complain, but the majority of your customers will be fine. So this can basically just be like maybe 10-15% of user base, right, routing their request to this environment, and then watching. And over time, you can tell, if everything is fine, and then you do a full cutover. So I think, of course, this is how I would, deal with situations like this. Collaboration is key there, right? There's this thing around, you don't force it, right? You don't force it. You you make this process, really interesting. Because you're trying to people don't like being told what to do, right? But there are ways in which you can, make some things work while not telling people what to do, right? Um, some people would organize, maybe hackathon, for instance, or saying, "Oh, um, let's let's try to, let's build this system. Let it have this, let it have that, let it have this, let it have that." Right? This is you incorporating these things that you want to see, right? And then you're building this habit where people are actually thinking of, different ways to building that resilient system, right? Because that's what you're basically giving them to do to solve, right? It could be both external and internal, right? Host something, you could basically host something, people come together, collaborate, think of great ideas, and then you look at all these things, and this is becoming a habit. You could also have trainings, right? You encourage people to take trainings, right? You could basically just tell them, oh, take this, or what, whatever you want to take around this. You could actually, subsidize some of these things for you, and then this way, you're encouraging people to actually learn, all right? When you have, and then I mentioned the collaboration thing where, within cross-functional teams, right? People come together, talk about, certain, thing, talk about, maybe something that would have happened in the past, how to, make it better. And, when you have different people sharing ideas, not just developers, right? You have, your customer service team, someone in customer service, you have someone in products, everyone is sharing, their ideas around, how this can be, right? It basically just creates this thing around, oh, I know this person can actually, the last time I had this conversation, oh, this person, brought up some very interesting idea, right? I would always want to go back and have this conversation. Like, it's something that I do today, right? There are things that I basically would have to, call some of my, people who talk about this thing, because, you have a lot of people that are smarter than you, right? You have to accept it, right? And, this is how you basically would grow. This is how you would get things better. And in collaboration, you get new ideas, right? You basically unlearn and learn, right? Because someone can actually challenge what you already know, right? And then you see that, oh yeah, it can actually be this, right? So when you have this constant collaboration, learnings, the maybe adjustment in processes, the quick check, everyone quickly check this, or everyone quickly do this. I think over time, right, people tend to be aware of these things, right? It could be random challenges, it could be, just random, I think there's something we usually do at some point. It's more like quick, like a fake escalation kind of thing, where someone can call you at random, will tell you X, Y is happening, and then you want to see how you can react to this thing, right? How you can basically, be available, right? So when something like this happens like two, three times, you basically have this sense of, oh, I don't want to be worried when someone calls me for something like this, right? I need to put in some things in place. So all these things actually contribute, in their very tiny ways, they play, good roles in ensuring that, there's this, culture within the environment. For the regulatory part, like I said, right, this is a very dynamic environment. Um, and it's not just in Nigeria, different parts of the world. And I would mention Africa now because that's the context in which we're talking about. Um, Things can literally change, right? The government can basically, revoke, access to certain kind of functions within a license. The government can, regulators can actually tell you to, stop collecting data in a certain way in which you collect data, right? All these things, will basically force you to adjust your mode of operandi, right? Um, but like I said, it's some of these things are inevitable, right? But I'll just say it is always good to expect, things like this, right? Some of them there's really nothing much you can do if it has to be something that changes your system entirely, right? And this is why I talk about having to work closely with regulators. And this is why you have a compliance team in a company, because they are the ones that can easily guide you before it gets to you, right? So with all these things in check, I don't, you will hardly be, caught, off guard, right? Of course, things can change, right? But the impact would not be as much as it would be if, you actually, following these processes. And then when it comes to infrastructure, right? Um, like I said, some of this environment actually, I think Tanzania, for instance, I think they are more strictly local, local data center and all that. I'm not so sure. Or there's environments where they will tell you it's just local is your data center has to be local, data has to be local, right? So um you need to be able to, if you're going to expand across, just like I said earlier, you need to be able to cater to these things because they impact how your service, work. And this is where sometimes when you look at the infrastructure, the factors that contribute to what service you're rendering, you need to be able to, understand, the level of service availability that you can promise. For instance, you're saying you're offering a 99.99%, service availability. You should know how many minutes that translates to in a month, for instance, right? And that would help tell you, what you can do. So if you know that you are in an environment where it is strictly a local data center, and you know that based on experience, based on what you've heard, based on what has happened, in the past before you went in, you could see that there are these challenges, or maybe lights, or maybe, the server can go down at some point, or maybe this, when you factor all those things in, you can know how much of a downtime you can have. This will basically help you know what alternative channel you can bring to the play. So if it is USSD, for instance, okay, you want to have this, and is it going to route to a different environment, at for a very short period because you need to come back to that data center, or is it an offline thing? So all these things are things that you need to put into play, because at the end of the day, whatever you're promising your users, it shouldn't be far-fetched from what you can actually do, right? And all these things will help how frequent you can deploy, right? how frequent you can make changes. So if you're promising 99.9%, for instance, you know how many minutes of downtime in a month, right? You can tell, if there'll be downtime when you deploy, for instance. So we shouldn't deploy at this point in time, right? If it's the case where you know that, oh, this server can actually, mess up at some point in time, right? You can basically defer some of the things that you want to push, right? As long as they're not critical changes, right? So again, understanding these factors, it's really going to help you know how to design your system, right? I talked about localization as well, right? I talked about, the bandwidth thing. I think most of the things I talked about with respect to infrastructure, network and co, it still ties around this. So having to understanding all these things, both the regulatory bits, policies and all that, both the AML, both security bits, how these things play across both, data handling and all that. When you understand all these things, it will help you know how to build a system, right? So you don't fall short of expectations, right? So yeah. When we talk about relevance, I think we look at what people use at the moment, right? Ease of entry and co. I know AngularJS is not as popular as it used to be back then, because now you have like Vue, you have Flutter, come into play, and of course React.js is still there, right? But I think what I used to say, but is if something is working for you, right? Um, I think you should just continue using it. But if you're thinking of if you it depends on what you're trying to offer, right? If you think that if you're offering a service where you would need more people, right, to come in, you need to roll out more features and all that. And this is something I would continue in the next maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 years. You need to be able to transition to something that you would find more people, right? So that it can be easy for you to maybe to get an alternative. That's get other engineers. You should be able to see support, right? I would, if I'm going for a language, right, one of the things that I look out for is the ecosystem, right? If I'm going to get a front-end engineer, I need to look at that ecosystem to see how active or how vibrant it is, right? If I notice, it is not as vibrant as I would expect it to be as compared to others, right? I would have a question mark there, right? I would rather look for something else, right? For AngularJS, while you will still see some people, you still see some people, are utilizing Angular or in Angular basically. I think there are other languages that are, already like in a picture, right? For Java is still a thing, right? I thought it's because of security. Oh, okay. If when we talk about security, I think everything still ties to what you do, right? An app is as secure as you make it, right? Angular, for me, it's a front end thing, right? And what is one of the things that is most important is how you secure your data in between front end and back end. And this is where we talk about encryption, right? Your Angular can be as safe as your, React.js, or it can be as safe as your, Vue.js. One of the things that brings insecurity here is, packages, right? Some packages can be outdated, right? Some may have been compromised. So the question is, these packages, are there constant support? Are these things being detected? So if I look at the GitHub, community for maybe any of these ones, right? Um, I will need to look at, the last, support cycle. I need to look at, the last date, the last commit. I need to look at things that would have been detected, right? I know it is very popular, for instance, for Node.js, right? You see a lot of things. They'll tell you, oh, this has been deprecated because of this security concerns XYZ, right? So these are the things I rather look at. Not really the language, right? But the supporting packages, that this thing uses, right? Java is as secure as .NET, right? It also depends on the things that you put in place. So infrastructure is also plays a very big role when you talk about security. your encryption is also very key. If you are encrypting your data properly, right, I don't think you should have an issue. Whether you're using Angular or you're using, Java. At the end of the day, you should just pay attention to, the community, right? If there are things that are being flagged, right? You need to see how fast they are being rectified. If there is no, if you don't have an upgraded package that solves that security vulnerability, then you should know that you're getting like it's looking like you need to like move out. You get, but for security wise rather, I don't see an issue with Java, or Angular JS in any ways. I don't see that.